Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Okay, so I've got something to say. I'm really excited on today's episode. I have two amazing girlfriends of mine, Nikki Quaid and Candy Puckett. Hi, ladies.
Hi.
So this has actually been something we've kind of tinkered around with talking about for a few months. And what's funny is I think it probably is something that actually came into fruition now because we're all on quarantine. I think it makes more sense to have this conversation right now. So on today's episode, we are going to be talking about something that is super private and personal, but something that is super relevant and I think very needed for people. We're going to be talking about anxiety. And really quick, I'll just give you a quick rundown of my life and dealing with this fabulous thing. I have dealt with panic attacks and anxiety for pretty much most of my life. And it's actually been something that's come intermittently at times where it was a constant all the time. When I was pregnant, actually with my first child, it got to where I was scared about leaving the house. I had my high school boyfriend, actually, one time I can remember driving with him. He was taking me home, and not only did I have anxiety and panic, but I would manifest things in my mind, like tell myself I saw things that weren't real type thing. And there were times where I ended up on the floorboard in his truck while we were driving because I could no longer handle what was in my head outside of the window. And so I've had different seasons of it where it was pretty intense. And then I've had years of freedom as well. And so I unfortunately, about 4 years ago, no, just over 5 years ago, actually, started it all over again to where I would have a panic anxiety attack, and then I'd have months of freedom. And then since the last year of my life with Reed's fabulous stunt, it's been more of a frequent visitor than I would like, but not so much panic attacks, just the anxiety and the feeling of the anxiety and the manifestations that happen. So I don't know about you guys. Nikki, I'll start with you. What your situation is like and how long you've dealt with it?
So as a kid, I don't actually recall having anxiety. It kind of started for me in college when I would start getting like the physical, manifestations of it, and I didn't know what it was or what to call it. I just thought I was tired. Like, I'm just tired. So I would have a really hard time catching my breath. And that for me is my biggest, I can tell if I'm not feeling it emotionally that I am internally feeling anxiety when I can't breathe correctly. And I can't catch that next breath. It's just like I'm constantly like I can't catch it. And so that started happening for me in college. I had a lot of family stuff going on. I was really worried about my brother. And that really triggered it for me pretty hardcore in college and throughout, my young adult years. When I could kind of put a finger on what it was, when I could express to somebody how I was feeling, those kinds of things. I was in counseling pretty regularly. I still go to a counselor when I'm not feeling right. But it helped me once I could figure out oh, that's what that is. I'm having anxiety. This is my body responding to something that's happening on the inside of me. I could work through it better. I could cope with it a little bit better. I could use, coping mechanisms and strategies and, all that different stuff to just try to pull myself out of, when you're in the thick of anxiety. So it's still something that I deal with. It's very situational for me. I've been dealing with it a little bit since this whole coronavirus stuff. A couple weeks ago, I went to Target and I hadn't been to the store. And so for the first time I saw, and this was weeks ago when truly there was empty shelves. And it was the first time I saw it, and driving home, I'm like, I'm having a hard time breathing. And I didn't think I was stressed out about that. I really didn't, but that was my body's response to internally, oh my gosh, there's no food on the shelves. This is, such a scary thing. And so that's happened to me a couple of times since we've kind of been in quarantine, but I can identify it and kind of work through it a little bit better. It's kind of like you, Connie, it's not something I deal with. Like, I can have seasons where I don't feel anxious, but then I can have things that trigger it for me. And, that's been happening to me more lately than it was before.
Right. What about you, Candy? What has your experience been?
So I'd agree. I don't think I ever registered anything childhood wise. I didn't have a terrible childhood or upbringing. It's more common stuff. Your parents got divorced, typical. I didn't really register stuff back then. I just kind of went along with the flow. I think my anxiety, I feel like I'm kind of on the, almost not beginning, like I'm familiar with it, but as far as treatment and stuff goes, I think I'm still just starting out on that journey. But I think mine probably triggered in college. I went through nursing school, and so I recognized test anxiety, which I never had before. But we would be building up for these tests, and we'd spend all day studying, and I would wait till the last minute, and it was just those physical manifestations. And then I take the test, and everything would just come crashing down. It was like almost not an adrenaline, but like I can tell when I'm anxious, because then afterward, when that situation's done, not even a threat, just the situation, I crash and I get a horrible headache, and it's just all the ugliness. And so that was my first taste. And I honestly I never put a name on it. I never put a label on it. And so it wasn't until probably in my pregnancy years, definitely my last one, which is coming up on about 4 years ago, where it was an everyday thing. And it usually for me, mine will manifest around my physical health, in like my direct family, their health, their safety, or my spirituality, or somebody else's spirituality, like of my direct family. And so it's a daily thing for me. I haven't sought out. I think that's why I mentioned, like, I am going on that part of the journey where I am going to start seeking out that external help, because I'm recognizing outside of my husband that he's recognizing it, and that there needs to be a few more things in place for me to be able to be successful throughout the day. It's not debilitating by any means, but there are days where, I'll, like you mentioned, like it's a different reality in your head where it's a threat, even though it's not to other people. And they're like, calm down, you're being ridiculous, especially with this outbreak. I have gone through days where I'm like, I got it, like, or I'm going to get it. And it's, not necessarily true, and so, but I'm like you, it's shortness of breath is a big one where I'll just feel that tightness, very irritable, and I can tell. And it's such a monster, it's such a beast. I hate it because it rolls off into how I interact with the kids, with my husband. And I also have thyroid issues, so I know that can also play a huge part. And so that's also been a journey of just getting the treatment. So that was my first thing of why I haven't pursued treatment in that, because I wanted to get my thyroid under control and see if that was just a byproduct or if it was its own, thing on its own. So that's where I'm at.
So have either of you ever on a regular or occasionally even experienced that debilitating where you're like, it's literally a second by second kind of thing just to get through it?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. I wouldn't say I've struggled chronically with panic attacks, but I'm familiar with them to where I remember driving with my family and in the moment, and it was like that impending doom, and I can't breathe, and this is my reality right now, and it was just, you are trapped, and how do I get out of this? Because you're that desperate to just, what do I do to make this stop? I just want to feel normal again, and it's terrible.
So obviously more of the relevance of this whole thing is, so on top of anxiety, or aside from anxiety, you're also a believer. So me personally, I'll just say my own personal, I don't know. And if I have, I'm unaware of it, and I'm grateful for that. But I don't know that anybody has ever looked at me differently or treated me differently because I have spoken about anxiety. I will say, especially with Reed's heart attack, as I spoke more about him being anxious or myself being anxious, I would be flooded a lot with scripture and verse and stuff about anxiety and all that other stuff. And somebody had sent me a link actually for CCV's series on anxiety, which was fabulous. I will say I took a little issue with some of it. And as I've actually experienced more of it being a regular for me since Reed's stunt, I've watched other pastors speak on it and podcasts and different things. And I will say it's kind of almost an unfair ground that I've noticed that is out there with believers and what they put out there. It's kind of almost like if you're a believer and you know that there's these scriptures that you can meditate on, then you should never have anxiety. And I think it does a lot of hurtful, unintentional injustice to people who are believers and yet still have anxiety. That being said, let me preface really fast with, I fully and totally believe that at any given moment in my life that God can choose to deliver me from it. I also know that he allows things to rest because there's something from it, something great that will come of it. And I'm looking at this now where I have literally begged at times for him to remove it from my life. I think he's giving me a window to go ahead and speak to other people on. And so for that, I'm really grateful. And so I know that there's deliverance from it. I speak freedom and victory over myself daily over it, because I know that I will, whether this side of heaven or not, I will see full victory and deliverance of it. I'm fully aware of that. And unless and until then, I will use it for God's glory. It's just who I am. So, but I do think we have a very mixed message. Especially, I think women are more affected with that mixed message of faith and anxiety, and that the two can't necessarily be in the same place. And so I was just really curious if either of you feel the same way or have experienced anything like that. Nikki, I'll start with you.
No, and I don't ever believe that lie. I never have believed that lie. There are things, on, like you said, on this side of heaven that we are going to struggle with and that people are going to struggle with. And I don't think we should ever just sit in it. I think we always need to explore what God wants to do with that situation, what he wants to do with us. But I don't believe that lie. Like, I just don't believe that just because you have faith, that you're a believer, that you shouldn't struggle. That's just like saying, like, well, you should just never struggle with anything. That's just that's not a thing, that's not possible. So, no, I don't think that's ever really happened to me. I honestly haven't talked about this to a ton of people, I've never talked about it publicly, just because I've been able to kind of manage it, I guess, in my own little world. But I've also grown up at a church where, like Connie, that wouldn't be said for the most part, like at our church. And maybe that's why I'm comfortable, no, like, I don't believe that. That's not the truth. Like, I believe that God can work through it and do what he wants with it. But I have not received, personal victimization over struggling with anxiety while also, believing and walking with the Lord.
Right. Candy.
Oh, I have. I will say, our church is really cool. They did just recently, right before everything hit, they did a mental health series. And that, I think, broke that mold a little bit for some of those believers who have that. But I've experienced it. I don't believe it, but I have experienced it in a few different ways. There's been times when I would get an attack and it would amp my anxiety up, and I would search for other believers of what they would say. I'd look online, and so many times it would direct you to some very, credible sites and that are staples in our faith and online, presence. And I'd go, and it was, basically, if you prayed more or, just the different things. And so that was one thing. There's also been people that I love dearly that just believe a little bit differently. I don't doubt their own walk or their own faith, but what I have heard them tell me, because just a quick side note to that was my husband is clinically OCD, so it's a daily anxiety thing for him. And like you said, Connie, until God heals him on this side of heaven or not, he is on meds. He has to be, because I've seen him on and I've seen him off, and it is debilitating. And so going into that, we knew having kids, we were looking out for it, because that's genetic. And so sure enough, we do have one that's not on meds because it's not disrupting his day, but he has it. He has OCD. And like you said, we don't like it, but I've been able to minister to Alex saying, thank God you have it, because can you imagine if Rowan was the first one that had it, how terrified he'd be. But now you can use this as a platform to minister to him and to tell him this is our normal, you know, and to not be afraid of the thoughts that are in his own mind, you know. And so saying that, I had been sharing that, and I had somebody tell me, you know, I feel like if you confessed differently, he would not have it. You need to say, no, he does not have OCD. And it was like, I love you dearly, but I need you to stop, because that's not true. That God does not make our faith cookie cutout. You know, we are not the same. And God doesn't say that we're not going to have problems. Like, there's scripture that promises, hey, guess what? You're going to have problems in this world, but I have overcome. There's also, I just was talking to Ron the other day, you know, about anxiety. And I told him about we read it in Paul, like with Paul, how he talks about that thorn in his side. And we don't know what it was, but he's begging God, and God says no. And there's a reason for that. And so it's just, I wish that lie would just go away, and that believers, especially when you manifest an anxiety regarding your spiritual life. So for me, when I would hear that, it would automatically just double back of, well, then are you even saved? And then my anxiety was just through the roof of like doubting everything. Am I saved? Am I not? Oh my gosh, you know, and it's such a terrible thing to put out there, especially when you're seeking that help from other believers and people you trust and who are well-intentioned, but you're like, thank God we do have that truth written in God's word, and that we look to that over another believer as gospel, you know, because I can't imagine the devastating effects it could have if people didn't know that, you know.
And that's what I have thought on, because at times, especially in this last year since Reed has gotten home, I didn't know it at first, but I was diagnosed with PTSD. I didn't know it makes sense. But I struggled with it as well. And the counselor didn't really, I think healthy people see counselors. Can I just say that? So I love my counselor. But I didn't understand the diagnosis of PTSD, and I struggled with it. And a really good friend of mine said the reason I struggle with it is because in the history of my life, I have very close family members or friends that have used, at times, I have watched a diagnosis be used as a manipulation of things in ways. And so I didn't realize that was what my struggle was, or why it was like that, because veterans or police officers, first responders, I find them like PTSD is allowable in my head. But for me, it just felt like, I don't know, like an easy way out almost. And so then once I had that spoken to me, and I had to really like meditate on that, and I was like, okay, God, is that because I am a face it and deal with it? I was like, is there truth in that? Is there value in that? And then I became okay with it, because I did start seeing similarities of certain things of why I was resenting it or pushing it away versus accepting it and leaning into it and being like, how can I use this? And once I stopped fighting it and was like, okay, so then now let's walk through this recovery, it made it so much easier. But at times, it would be so difficult to breathe. I would have to go outside just because inside I felt claustrophobic. And I remember just weeping and praying over myself and reminding myself of so many scriptures and thanking God that I know that this is going to pass. Like tomorrow is coming. And I've always known, even though sometimes the nights are just low, and I will pace and pull and count and shake, and like there's just in and out of the bathtub kind of thing. I don't know why. But I know tomorrow is coming. And I remember sitting outside and just bawling and praying, and all of a sudden realizing how many people there are in this world that go through this, that either don't have that relationship with Jesus or that do, and they think something's wrong with them, like what you said, Candy, where it's you start second guessing, all because probably some well-meaning people said some really unintelligent things and hurtful things. And so for me, I have at times had to rely on medication. I was on medicine for a year after Reed's stunt because I needed the extra help. Usually though, it's very much sometimes a moment by moment for me when it's really flared up, I guess I could say. But I'm a worship my way out of it, or worst case scenario, I do have something that hangs on the fridge that kind of just re-engages my five senses. But outside of that, and I do see a counselor on a regular basis since Reed's stunt and at different times of my life. But I know, Candy, you had said you're just kind of starting that road of looking at outside sources for help navigating certain things. Nikki, have you had anything or outside? I know you spoke of a counselor as well that you've had to rely on, or that you
so I have been in counseling pretty much, not regularly, but kind of in and out when things are flaring up, when needed, type of thing, for probably 12 years.
Yeah.
And then, so we were supposed to go on, a mission trip to Honduras this summer. So we're not now, but we were supposed to go. And I went to, see my primary care doctor, about a month ago, a little bit more, but this was right before everything with, the virus started. And I was just kind of telling her because up to that point, I had never been prescribed any sort of anti-anxiety medication. I had been asked in the past if I wanted it, and I said no. Not because I felt bad, but I just felt like I just not yet. Like I just don't need it yet type of thing. When I probably did. But for me, it was just like not yet type thing. But as I have gotten older, I have become so panicked by flying in an airplane. It's like ridiculous. Like I'll do it, but like I did have a panic attack last time I was on a plane, which was about a year ago. My Apple Watch notified me like, hey, your heart rate's too high you've been sitting for, 2 hours, your heart rate's too high. And I did feel it, but I was just trying so hard to, focus on other things, like just keep it together. And there was nothing wrong with the flight. Nothing. Wasn't bumpy. There was nothing wrong, but I was so afraid. And my husband sitting next to me, I showed him my watch, and he's like looking at me like, because on the outside I look fine, like it looks okay. So he's like genuinely confused, like, why is your heart rate in the hundreds and we're sitting here, like you don't even look afraid, and so he was really confused. So anyway, that was when the next time I went to a counselor and they told me like, hey, you can ask for something, like even if it's just for flying, you can ask for something to take before you get on an airplane. And I was like, no, I didn't know that. That's amazing. I'm definitely going to do that. So when I went to the doctor in March, I was telling her like, I struggle with like general anxiety, like different situations. I've kind of learned how to manage it, but like I do get it every once in a while. And also, I'm totally afraid of flying. And so I want to go on this mission trip, but I'm so afraid. I legit had a panic attack last time I was on an airplane. And so she's like, yeah, no problem. I'll prescribe you something super low in milligrams, but so you have it if you need it. I'm like, okay. So then this happens, and now we're not going on this mission trip. And I have, this medication. And so the second time that started to happen with the shortness of breath, it was about a little over 2 weeks ago, maybe. It was the first day, not the first day, but it was really the last day that I went to work at church, and then was basically told, like, we're not doing this anymore. So I don't know if that sent me into like some sort of anxiety mode, but I couldn't catch my breath all day. And it just feels so crappy when it's happening, because it's like, how do you make yourself come down? I mean, like, you can do that stuff, you know, like you can do the breathing and the five senses, but sometimes, and that's my thing with anxiety for me, is that sometimes it gets to a point where I can't. Like, I've done everything and I can't do anything else, and that's when I need some sort of intervention, whether it's medication or I don't know, but there comes a point for me where I just can't. I've done it all and I can't do it. So anyway, I was texting Connie that night. I'm saying, I'm having trouble breathing. I have this medication. I've never taken it. I really want to take it because I cannot breathe, but I'm afraid to take it because I never have. And so Connie just gave me that little push that I needed. But so I took it for the first time, and it's a very low dose, but I took it and it helped me so much. Like, it just made me feel like sleepy enough that I could go to sleep peacefully. And it also literally removed pressure that I felt on my chest, like from not being able to breathe. It removed that. So for the first time, I'm 33. I've struggled with anxiety for probably 13 years, and just got something prescribed for me, but I've still only taken it one time. However, it does give me a lot of comfort knowing that I have it. And I just think it's another one of those ways that for me, God is really good, because he knew I wasn't going to go on this mission trip, but he also knew that it might still be helpful for me because I'm not going to abuse it. That's not my personality. But that it would just be helpful to have that just in my back pocket. If I get to a place where I'm like, I can't, I've done everything I can do, and I just, sometimes I think we get to a point where we just need that step.
Well, I think the thing, especially with the type of medication that you're talking about, which is the same that I have, it's been the same thing. I've probably had it prescribed to me for probably 7 years, and good, bad, or indifferent. I hope my doctor doesn't hear this. No, she knows how old it was. It's the same thing as far as like just having it is a comfort, and ends up when I can feel something coming on, just knowing that it's there actually ends up helping. And I haven't needed to go take it up until Reed's situation happened. And then luckily, because the panic and anxiety became so severe, I actually had convinced myself I was having a heart attack. She said, do you still have any of this left? And I'm like, yeah, but it's old. It's like 5 years old. And she said, go take it. And I was so relieved that I did, because one, I definitely was not having a heart attack, but also just the pure torture I was putting myself in, because on top of being a believer in having anxiety, and taking a medicine for it, there's also like this whole like, oh, really? Like we're doing crack or something. And I think there's a lot of, even in just people's facial expressions at times, where it's like, oh, really? And so you almost become like concerned at even saying that you have as a backup in case of emergency, let alone being a daily taker of something, like, and we should never feel that way. Like, we shouldn't have to worry about it. We should be able to just talk about whatever it is and be accepted in that sense. But at the same time, it's like you can take medication for being having a disease like diabetes or something, but for some reason with anxiety, it's like, oh, shame on you, as if it's something that's controllable. And what I will say on that is the only part of anxiety that's controllable is where you focus your thoughts. So in the midst of it, in the midst of the attack of whatever it is, for however long it lasts, I unfortunately am one of those, when I have a panic attack, most average panic attacks I've read online are like 30 minutes. Mine are hours of torture, and begging my husband, please pray over me, and I'll do worship songs, and I'm literally wandering the house and all of this other stuff, but the brain, you're literally fighting such a massive emotional battle of, you didn't even realize your thought went to the wrong place again. So now you got to reel it back in and undo the damage that that one thought gave you. And it's just this constant, and it can be pure torture. And yet at the same time, like Nikki was saying, that one time it was more of the buildup in her all day of, I've never taken it though, and I'm afraid to take it just because she didn't know what it was going to feel like. And it did exactly what it was supposed to do, and took that edge off of her to where she could then collect herself and refocus and get to sleep and all of that other stuff. And I think now it's, I don't know, even during Corona quarantine, you're not taking it. So I think it's just the whole thing of having it. But
yeah, it's super helpful.
Yeah,
now that I've taken it and that I know how I will respond to it, because that's just the thing. It's like when you say like, why torture ourselves if there's something that can chemically bring us down, you know, like.
Well, you have to like, it's almost flipping the switch in the brain. And that is what a lot of people don't understand. So anxiety is another, it's in the mental health field of situations. And so it's whether it be misfiring or whatever of the brain, or a pattern that the brain has developed because it liked it for whatever reason. Like I didn't realize until Reed's situation, I would always shake and I thought I was cold. And it was one of the doctors taking care of Reed in the hospital that said, that's your adrenaline. Do you realize you're in fight or flight mode right now? And I was like, nope. Because you get so used to being in this pattern of things and you use the same situation. And then when he pointed that out, I was like, because I'm wrapping myself up in blankets, you know? And so I think just having that ability to be like, okay, we need tools in our tool bag of what works, and finding what works, and what works for me might not work for somebody else. And if the only comfort I have is to say, I know I deal with it too, and it just makes you feel better about yourself and not so alone or isolated, then in just that knowledge, Satan gets defeated.
Well,
because that's part of the disease.
You know, right. And praise God that he gave, you know, there's people that are so gifted in the medical field, in the, you know, technology field, and the scientific, all those things that allow us to discover these medicines. And it's like, it's not a black and white, there's gray, and where you might not need a medication because you have very mild, there's a spectrum, you know, there's just somebody might need it day to day. And I've seen that play out. And it's just, like you said, that, you know, we can do all these things, but God has this avenue available for us. And, you know, he might bring healing on his own without that, and he might bring healing through that. And it's not up to anybody to, you know, put that stigma on other believers, certainly. Well, anyone really, but.
So let me ask you ladies then, especially now with this world of quarantine and coronavirus, how are you, if at all, seeing a buildup of even more? Is it the same, or are you doing well in the way things are with Corona and the isolation almost during this time? Do you find it the same or more difficult? Candy, I'll start with you.
Well, me, I'm like you. So initially, I'm an introvert, so I'm fine with staying home. I deal with anxiety every day, so I'm more aware of it just because of the circumstances. I think it's so vital, and I'm so grateful the times that you've checked in, because we need that, and that's helped just to bounce those thoughts off. You know, with Alex, he's a police officer, so he's out exposed to the general public, and so there's that thought of, we're the risk, you know, to other people, because what he brings home. And it just, for me, I'm such a control freak. And so God, I know, is showing me like, hun, you are not in control, let alone in this virus right now, this pandemic, because you go to Walmart, you're going to be exposed likely, you know? And so it's just, that has grown me of just, listen, God's in control. Like, I can't try to grasp onto this and make it turn out my way. I think, like you said earlier, we go for walks, we get out, and the dogs have probably not been in better shape since. because there's times where the walls just are closing in, like I cannot breathe. We get out, and it's just that distraction of my mind is on something else, and now it's kind of almost that reset. I do love that tomorrow's coming, because most of the time I can go to sleep and I'll wake up and it's much more manageable, if not gone. But I also I've been digging in. I'm not always faithfully every day in the Word, but I am just digging in and doing. I'm so grateful for the people that just have that, their finger on that pulse of, let's get this out to this body of people that struggle. So we do, daily devotions that have kind of more geared toward it. But my biggest takeaway, even before this hit, was my anxiety is always, what if? What if this happens? What if this? And it's definitely, like you said, that new pattern of your mind of where it goes. But turning the what if to the even if. It doesn't change who God is in my life, doesn't change his plan for me, but the what if might happen. What if happened to you, Connie? And watching that, seeing that what if turned into an even if, and God still showed up in ways that he probably never would have if it didn't happen. And it was just like, okay, it focuses from the worry to the worship, of, okay, even if, we'll walk through it. God promises that. And so I don't want it, but there might be something, some way I need to grow, or God's trying to connect with me. What if my prayer is, I want to be closer to you? Well, this is the way we're going to do it. Okay. Like looking back, I wouldn't have it any other way then, even as unpleasant as it can get. But I wouldn't say there's a huge spike or anything. I think it's just my normal day-to-day anxiety. I don't feel, there are times, like you said, when you're at the store and you see the empty shelves and you're just like, dear God, like I have 4 kids. How am I going to get this food? But he's shown up every time. And I've actually walked away every grocery trip, just like in tears, crying and praising, like, I got everything. I got everything. And not that I'm that one exception, that God's showing up, if people would just recognize that even in the midst of this scary time, he's still going to provide above and beyond, so, yeah.
Nikki, how about you?
I feel a little bit of a spike, a little bit, not huge, but the shortness of breath, that wasn't really, I wasn't dealing with that, before. I mean, I have in the past, but it wasn't like a super recent thing before this. And that has happened to me twice, pretty big, where it felt like I don't know what else to do. I can't breathe. But it's not too much more than normal. I really feel like it's kind of like Candy was saying, it's really been an opportunity to have to trust God. And I think that God has been giving, I think that he has been just pouring out like grace and patience and peace on us, because if it wasn't for that, I would be like super anxious. But I think he's been so gracious and just giving us peace as long as we, continue to trust in him. For me, things are really hard when they happen really fast, because I'm a processor. Like, I need to process what's happening, why is it happening, what does that mean for me, how am I going to move forward? And this whole thing happened, to me, it seemed really, really fast. Like a Wednesday night, my husband and I were going to dinner for our anniversary. That was March 11th. That was the day that the NBA canceled their season. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, what is going on? Like, I've like barely heard of this virus. I purposely didn't pay attention because I didn't want it to make me anxious. And now, like, sports are being canceled. This is crazy. And then, it was like 3 days later, it's like, stuff's canceled. You can't go to church. Like, it was so fast that I was like, I got to wrap my head around this, because this happened almost overnight. It felt like, so yeah, there are days when I will let my brain go too far down, the wrong path of, when it, just all those questions we start to answer, we want to have control. I am also, like Candy said, I'm also want to control situations. And so that God's doing the same thing with me. It's like, nope, when I say, and you just have to trust until that happens. So I have had a little bit of a spike, and some days it spikes up more than others. But it hasn't been like debilitating, and it hasn't been, way more often than it was happening before. But I can tell that my body, like with the shortness of breath, like that's been happening more since this.
Yeah. I had in the beginning, so the same thing. So your anniversary is my daughter's birthday.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to go to the cemetery, but Reed had a doctor's appointment. And so we said, like, by the time he was getting home, because it was raining that night.
Yeah.
And I said, you know what, we'll just go Saturday before church then instead, because Friday was our anniversary, the 13th. So on the 11th, this was the conversation we're having. On the 13th, we had to order pizza and wings here at home because we were on lockdown now, where it was 50 or less. So we knew, like, we were kind of, that was the last service we could have gone to actually on the 14th. And then now it's no more. So the first week and a half, because I'm like you, Nikki, I was like, well, wait a minute, what the heck just happened? Because I knew it was in China, but like, why are we having an issue? And so that first week and a half, I went to the grocery store and I cried because all of the lunch meat was gone. And we don't even eat lunch meat. We do deli counter because I have him on a low sodium. So it's not even prepackaged lunch meat anyways, but I noticed that it was gone and I just cried. And so luckily I had worship music on. And it was probably about that first week and a half that was the most difficult for me to navigate. And where I was very much struggling. I'm super blessed that I have an amazing tribe. And what's funny is us girls, when we talk, we seem to have fluctuating days of where one or two of us is not okay and one or two of us is doing really well. So we're able to like bring each other back in. I can only imagine what it would be like if we were all losing our stuff at the same time.
That's, I think, another way that God is very gracious.
Yes. But I learned with me really quick. So I'm pretty much no longer on Facebook, except every day we have daily devotional with church. I have an alarm set in my phone. So that way I know what time it is and I can automatically log on. So I don't have to peruse Facebook because I just cannot add to the noise in the head. I do not watch the news at all. Luckily, Reed works for the state. So I feel like as I need to know, he tells me. So, and it's just stuff I've had to stay away from. And on the upside of that, it has afforded me, I never would have known that I spent this much time in the morning drinking coffee on Facebook, but it has now offered me usually 2.5 hours of being able to be in worship, word, and quiet time with God. That being said, I have dogs. I don't have little kids, so I know everybody's situation is different. But for me, that's something I'm super grateful for. And one of the things that I've noticed is I have had not hardly any physical manifestations that I've had in the armpits normally, or in the chest, or even in the throat of feeling anxiety. And so I don't know if it's for this time that he's lifting it just so I can focus on some other stuff, or if we're entering another season that I've had multiple times throughout my life of, it ebbs and flows. Will tell you after how long's Reed's situation been? 15 months of pure constant anxiety of the head and the body manifestations. Sorry. I don't know why she thought I was talking to her. That I'm very happy to have like some type of relief from it. So, that being said, I was curious, I wanted to ask both of you as we wrap up, what do you use the most as like, do you have a go-to favorite scripture or song or both that's kind of the thing that you run to when it becomes the most overwhelming? So Nikki, I'll start with you.
Yes, I do love worship music. I feel like worship is just one of those ways that God can communicate with me on a really deep level. So there is worship that really does help. Sometimes it's not like a pretty prayer and it's not a verse. It's just, God, can you please help me? Like, can you just meet me where I am and tell me what is my next step of obedience right now? Like, what is that? I don't, because when I get to that place, for me, it's like, there's no logical thinking going on. It's just, I'm there. I'm down the rabbit hole. I'm there. It's bad. And I can't really get myself out. That's kind of what I've said before. Like, I get to a place where I'm like, I can't, I don't know what to do. And so for me, a lot of times it's just, God, can you just come meet me where I'm at and help me and show me? My husband is also very, very good at talking me off a ledge. He brings a lot of stability to me. And I think that's why my anxiety got so much better when I married him, is because he's just a constant, stable, level-headed all the time. And he just offers that to me whenever we have a conversation. I can tell him, hey, I'm feeling like that night. I was like, hey, I need you to stop what you're doing and listen to me. I am having a hard time breathing, and I need you to help me, to talk me through this. And so he can just bring a lot of logistics and facts and prayer. And so he helps me a ton. Worship helps me a ton. Obviously the Bible, but for me, when I'm in that place, it's hard for me to even read anything. I can't really focus. And so I would say mostly worship, and David just being able to kind of talk me down. He brings me down in a really special way. So I'm thankful that I married him for many reasons, but you know.
What about you, Candy?
About the meet me there, because even though I think when we pray, like when we do the more like sit down and pray about it, like I don't necessarily ever utter those words, but those are just raw and real. And I don't have, like, there's times where I'm like, God, I don't have the words. Like, I'd say prayer is not my strongest, like, attribute as a Christian, which is something that I think this time that God's allowed us to all do nothing, is just an opportunity for me personally. But that this is where I'm at. This is like, obviously, you're not taken by surprise that I'm in the midst of this anxiety attack. So just meet me where I'm at. And what are you trying, just help me. Just, there's things that I remember, because it literally, like, my anxiety, where it manifests, like, I just have to remind myself, like, my sister, who I go to a lot, she's a best friend, she's a mentor, and I remember her saying she had twins, and there was a season where, I think it was one of the RSV seasons, and they were both, one of them was very sick or something, I believe it's one of them, and I just remember she said, God has a plan, and I believed it then, and I believe it now, but, like, he would not take this one child 1 second too soon or 1 second too late, and if it's not his time, there is not one thing on this earth that's going to happen that will change that plan. And so that truth was like just a part of that anchor of, you're right. And also just remembering, like, it's God that's sustaining me, it's God giving me the breath that, even when I'm literally fighting for it, it's just turning into that worship of music and singing those things back to him. Like you guys said, music just unlocks it for me. Like, I connect with music. Worship music, sure, absolutely, but also just getting it out, music where the kids can come and we can all just get a favorite song on, but it's just so much more when it is a worship song. And also, I think, there's so many verses. I think there's one that it's just simple. It's in one of the Psalms, and it's just, when I'm afraid, I'll put my trust in you. And it's not this long, drawn out, popular verse. It's, when I'm afraid, I'm just going to put my trust in you, because that's all, not that all I can do, but all I just need to do. And it's just, that just kind of steadies me. And it's funny, because when I'm having, like, I think it was the night you posted, Connie, and you were like, is anybody else feeling this way? And I was like, me, because it was such a low night. And all that happened was, like, we've got our, a grip on what's happening. We know how things are, they're not so good right now with the world. And it was just a simple text of somebody saying, it was a picture of, hey, we need to have this plan in place in case you get sick. And it was just that thought process of what I'm going to have to walk through if I get sick, and oh my God, and these kids, and who's going to watch them. And it was just, like you said, a rabbit hole. And it literally just sunk me. And of course, God knew that, and God it's almost like he holds my hand and walks me to help teach others lessons, even as I'm saying something to my kid, and I'm like, okay, God, I get it. Like, I hear you loud and clear. You're making me almost repeat it back to myself. Because sure enough, that night, I'm sitting there ministering to my daughter, who's struggling, and I'm saying these things and they're just bouncing right back to me, and God's just like, no, believe it. Like, I'm here with you. You're telling your daughter this now. You need to believe for yourself. Not that I don't, but like you said, when you're in that moment, there's no logical thought. It's just, get me out of this moment now, whatever way, you know. And I'd also agree, like, my husband is, for him being on, you know, having OCD and being on meds for his life, and the things that I can throw at him, like, what if this happens? And I can throw some scary stuff, situations, what if? And he's just like, then we'll cross it. We'll cross that bridge if we ever get there, but you might never see that bridge. So let's just, we'll deal with it if and when it happens. And that, I'm like, oh, well, okay, you know. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, you know, there's other things that are at play that are going to need to be used and utilized. And I think just, I'm ready for that. But I think it's just dynamic. It's different things. And thank God we have those avenues to pursue. And
Right.
I was going to say one more thing too, kind of piggybacking off of Candy, because worship and, you know, having somebody who can talk you through stuff is like, you know, really awesome things. But at some point we do need tools to sometimes get us out of that hole. And so when I can get myself in a place where I can kind of, you know, start self-talking, for me, it helps a lot to kind of, like Candy was saying, just play the what ifs out a little bit, because for me, my anxiety, and probably like this for everybody, but my anxiety tells me that something that I don't really have a reason to fear, I should fear that, even though there's no proof that I need to be afraid of that thing, but my mind is telling me that I do, for all these reasons that aren't true or valid or real or whatever. It's basically taking something that's untrue, you know, no facts to back it up, but I need to be afraid of that. And so if I can play that out a little bit and counteract the truth to that lie, my godmother taught me when I was young, you have a column of lies, and then you counteract them with what's the truth to that lie. And sometimes literally putting on paper helps so much. Well, you know, I'm afraid of this. Okay, so what's the truth to that lie? You know, and so it's really awesome to have all these, you know, like praying, of course, and worship, of course, and having people around you that can talk you through it. But we do sometimes need those actual tools. And that is one that I can usually get myself to do, because it really does help me to see the truth to whatever that lie is. And it helps me physically see on paper that, oh, that is a lie. I don't have a reason to be afraid of that. My mind is telling me that I do, but I don't.
Yeah, like also it almost strips it of its power in that moment. And our worst case scenarios that we think, it's like, okay, so then maybe it is good for us to like play it out, you know, not camp out on it, but just, okay, should this happen? There is an answer. There's, you know, my thing is I have to realize if this worst case scenario happens with something with my health, it is not an automatic death sentence. And surely as a believer, you know, like that's something God's working through with me, that's something for years now, is I shouldn't fear death. But it's also just, it piggybacks onto my anxiety of, well, my spiritual status, you know. And it's so funny how it's disgusting how a giant and a beast, and just how it grows in my mind. But it's almost, yeah, like you need to, fine, let's walk this through, and we'll see that there's steps to take, and there is a resolution, there is a light at the end of that tunnel, there is still God every step of the way. And it just almost, if you're in that mindset, can strip it of the power, where you're like, oh, that's just a dumb lie. And it may be a reality one day, but right now it's not. And so it's kind of just like a hold on a second, and helps.
Yeah. A lot of times something David will say to me is, has that ever happened to you before? I'm like, no. Okay. Like sometimes that alone is like, all right, that's never even happened to me before. Why am I afraid of it right now?
I would literally like have to throat punch David a few times.
I know. I'm telling you, but
Be like, thank you, but I don't like you either right now. Like,
I know.
can we just go to my crazy
with
place?
that truth, it's like,
yeah,
you know,
absolutely. Absolutely.
you know, it's one thing to be afraid of something that's happened to you before because you're afraid of it happening again. But it's another when it's like, nope, it's never happened before.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one though. Don't tell him I said that, but that's a good
I won't tell him you said that, but you can use it.
But anyways, well, I guess we can wrap this up. I'm so just blessed and grateful for you both, just the willingness to come on and do this and speak about something that's just super vulnerable and transparent. And I really just believe that this is just going to rock somebody's world for the better and just change things. I believe that when other people hear this, that it's just going to give such victory over a fight that they've thought they were alone in and feeling defeated in and fearful of, and just shine God's glory in it so abundantly. And it's going to just be life-changing. I really, truly believe that because of what it is. And I just think that when we are vulnerable and transparent and allow God to move in something, that's where it has, which is funny because we are all three controllers. So, but when you just let it go and say, okay, God, lead this, I'm super excited for that.